Rise Career Exploration is financially supported by listeners like you. Every dollar helps towards future podcast episodes. Click on the link in the show notes or visit us at risecareer.org today. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the show. And remember, together we rise.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, welcome everyone. I'm your host, Corey Alexander, licensed school counselor, author, and entrepreneur. And this is Rise Career Exploration, the podcast, where we interview guests on their professional journeys. Choosing a career can be one of the most difficult decisions of your life. Join me as we interview guests on their professional journeys. You'll find that the twists and turns of career struggles aren't unique to you, and that the path to your dream profession isn't always a straight line. Whether you are a student who wants to learn what it takes to be in a specific career, or just want to hear some great career advice, this podcast is for you. Gary J. Nelson, architect with over 30 years of experience. To read his list of accomplishments would be like reading a short story. So I'll just need you to trust me on this. He's been there and done that. In brief, he's worked on museums, resorts, municipal buildings, sports arenas, such as football stadiums, soccer and baseball stadiums, in various cities, and much, much more. If we had to guesstimate the dollar figure of the projects he's worked on, it'd be well north of $3 billion. And that's on the conservative side. He's who the big boys called when they need it done right the first time. He's a proud member and president founder of the Arizona chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. Please welcome Mr. Nelson. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me for all our aspiring architects. If you don't mind, we could just jump right in.
Sure, great.
Okay, so these first set of questions are from the Paterson, New Jersey middle school students of School 2. All right? Question 1 is from Joel Galvez. What is the tallest and most expensive building you ever designed?
The tallest building I've ever designed was part of a project team, because as an architect, everybody's not a designer. You have different roles in a project. And so I served project as a project manager, was the Mercedes-Benz Stadium located in Atlanta, Georgia. And that is about 30 stories high, about 300 feet high.
Okay, great. How much was that project in cost?
$1.5 billion.
Wow. Question 2 is from Sarah Castillo Murillo. What are the important issues, considerations, and challenges of a project?
The important considerations is the user, the people, of who's going to be. That's the most important thing out of everything. What is the purpose of it? Is it a school? Is it a library? Is it a sports facility? Or is it an office building? That's the number one important thing. 2 is the challenges of the goals, the dreams of the client to make those a reality. And so those are the 2 challenges of it. The third challenge could be the site, the location of the site. If it's a hilly site, if it's a small site, if it's an odd-shaped site. I'll give you an example of those the students who are familiar with the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The reason the Pentagon has its shape like that is because the land limited the kind of design that you could have based on all the things that they needed to design that building.
Oh, that's a nice fun fact. Yeah, cool. That makes sense. Question 3 is from Ireland Torres. How do you come up with designs?
Designs come up with what they call a concept. Based on listening to a client, what they want, or listening to students for a school, you come up with ideas based on what they want and the goals and the area. And I'm going to use a library as an example. Let's say you want to have a library that's really open and a lot of reading areas, but you want to be surrounded by private areas. So the concept would be designing like a pod kind of So that's how the design comes from. And then you have a vision. Sometimes you have architects have visions of what it should look like. One of my projects was a stadium, and it was an opening and closed stadium, Chase Field in Arizona. And the lead designer, he came up with the idea with, years ago, there used to be medicine cups. They used to be collapsible. And he used one on a plane, and he said, well, maybe I can do that with a roof. So ideas come from anywhere.
Oh, that's awesome. That's exciting. That sounds like fun. This question is from Aaliyah Hernandez. What is your favorite structure to design?
My favorite is community projects. I love doing community centers, senior centers, police stations, fire stations. I love those, design those. But it's a two-part. I have an A, 1A, 1AB. So
okay.
I can't. But besides that, it's sports facilities. I love. I'm a sports fan. So I love doing stadiums and arenas. Both of those give me a lot of joy.
All right. So what's the joy in the first one, the first set, the municipal buildings? What's the draw to that?
I'm a firm believer in giving back to the community.
Okay. Perfect.
There's a family that did it, and that's my passion is to give back to the community that I live.
That's awesome.
And I know everybody gets a enjoyment out of a library or a community center.
Yeah, that sounds great. My next question is from Nicholas Ruiz. When did you decide you wanted to be an architect?
I wanted to be an architect very early in my life. When I was very young, first or second grade, I had a sister and an aunt who were physically disabled. And I grew up in a time where there weren't ramps and elevators and things that were available for the people who are physically disabled like they have now. Some of the students are watching us go to the bathrooms and they see bars in certain stalls to help those. Those didn't exist for many years. And there was an elevator. So I used to see my family struggle with that when we would try to go back to the second floor. My aunt and my sister would have difficulty. Sometimes they would have to be carried to the second floor. And so I thought that was wrong. And I said, I wanted to make a difference in my life. I didn't know what that was very early on, but I wanted to make a difference. Well, in sixth grade, we had an assignment for careers. And I saw this book, So You Want to Be an Architect. And that book described what an architect does and making a difference in the community. And from that point on in sixth grade, I knew that's what I wanted to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, purpose. This question is from Wahasa Strong. What aspect do you like most about designing?
The aspect I like most is seeing the looks on the faces of those who use the buildings. The end result. That's what I like most. During the process of design, process of being an architect, I enjoy making something real. Taking an idea from paper and then seeing it become real in real life building. I get a lot of joy out of it.
Yeah, nice. This is from Simera Valdiviso. How long does it take to become an architect and what are the steps?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
How long does it take to become an architect and what are the steps?
So the steps are, it approximately takes 5 to 6 years of college based on the kind of college you go to. So if you go to a college that has what we call an accredited architecture program, there's about 800 of those in the United States. And you go there and depending on the school program, anywhere from 5 to 6 years to go to college and get a degree in architecture. After those 5, 6 years, you'll join a company or a firm and you'll work for 2 to 3 years learning more about architecture and how things are, how things put together from school and in real life. And then after the second or third year, you will take an exam called the Architectural Registration Exam. And that's a 6-part exam that you take and it's offered nationally. And you take that exam to pass to become a registered architect.
Wow. That's pretty lengthy.
Yes, it is pretty lengthy. It takes a lot of time. And I always say, you're going to spend those 8 years doing something in your life.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
So if you look at it that way, but it does take time and it's commitment. But 8 years is going to be 8 years.
Yeah, you're right. That makes perfect logic. Yeah. This is from Sanaya Taylor. What can someone just starting out expect to make, like to earn?
Salary is around $60,000 a year, depending on the part of the country.
Okay.
And that's
All right. So,
when I first got out of school, the starting salary was $18,000 a year. So it's a big jump in terms of salary.
yeah. So thank you again to Middle School 2 in Patterson and their teacher, Mr. Hanson. So these are my questions now. Where are you from?
I'm from Hempstead, New York. Hempstead, Long Island.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm from Harlem, New York. Okay. New York.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's where my parents were raised in Harlem. Grew up in Harlem. I'm second generation West Indian American. My grandparents emigrated to Harlem. And so my brother actually works in Harlem off of 125th Street.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I grew up 5 blocks from El Palo. Yep.
Oh, really?
On the west side. Yeah.
Oh, great.
What type of high school student were you?
I was a student that worked really hard. And so the grades didn't come easy to me, but I was a good student. And I knew I had to really focus in terms of spending the time into study. So overall, I was a good high school student, focused in terms of what I needed to do and what I wanted to do.
What were some of your early career interests other than being an architect?
Believe it or not, architecture was my only interest since 6th grade.
Wow. That's beautiful. Blessing. Yeah.
Thank you. It was the only thing I ever thought about and ever dreamed. No other, not even professional sports.
Nothing to distract you. That's awesome.
Nothing distracting me. Thank you.
Yeah. Amen. When and how did you come to realize that being an architect was your calling? And what was your first move when you locked in on it as a profession?
I realized it was my calling once I realized, like I mentioned before, that being an architect will help me realize the dream to help people like my aunt and my sister, designing buildings and making the built environment better. So that was early on in 6th grade. And I became locked in just by reading more books about it. And I started working, I knew architecture had to be creative. And I liked doing creative things anyway. So I really built different hobbies around creativity. I used to build a lot of models. I used to make a lot of things. I used to make cabinets. I made things like that. I tried to find ways to be creative. I was a DJ. I created music in the 70s and 80s because, again, you're taking something that exists and you're creating something new. So I did all of that. Academically, I found out early on you needed to know math and the sciences. So as a high school student, I really paid attention to make sure that I grasped all the math that I was taking in school. And those are the things I did to lock in. Ironically, drawing was not very early on in my life. I didn't draw until I got into college. I did some, but nothing. Most of it was building and creating.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Because that was a creative way to stay creative. It wasn't a textbook way to stay creative. No one would mention being a DJ as a way to stay creative, but you kept the same mindset. So that's good. So people could hear, you want to have a mindset, a habit, a skill set of whatever their profession is going to ultimately be. That's great. When I first arrived at Universal Records, there was more paperwork than I expected. What was a big surprise to you when you first became an architect?
One of the big surprises was, and I didn't know a lot about architecture. I didn't know a lot about the profession. I just know what I do. But one of the things that was a big surprise was the instability sometimes of the profession. What I mean by that is I came from a family and in my environment where people work 20, 30 years at the same job. And I thought the same thing would happen to me as an architect. Where architecture basically goes as the economy goes and goes how society goes. And if there's a need for, and I'm going to use houses and things, then they'll build. If there's not a need, then they won't build, or schools and things of that nature. So when I first got out of school, unfortunately, my first experience was after 2 years, I was laid off.
Wow.
That was a big surprise to me because I just thought that wherever I go, I was going to spend the rest of my life. But that taught me very early on that, with architecture, specifically architecture, but a lot of other professions, but with architecture, I had to put myself in the best position. So should that happen again in the future, I've maximized my experiences. So what that did was it allowed me to whenever I went somewhere else, to not think that I was going to be there forever. That to say that to take advantage of all the opportunities and challenges in the here and now of those jobs. And that taught me how to be a better architect, because I always prepare myself for possibly the next step in my career, which it may be 2 years or 10 years. But that allowed me, that was the biggest surprise, that I really need to take full advantage all the time of wherever I was working.
Yeah, that's a great learning lesson, and it's a blessing to have learned it earlier, right? When you have less on the line as far as financial responsibilities. So that was a blessing you learned that earlier, and you took it as a life lesson instead of something negative. You took it and made it positive, and that added fuel to your learning curve. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Only 2% of licensed architects in the United States are Black or African American. How did this affect your decision, if at all?
I didn't know that there was only 2%, because when I read the book, So You Want to Be an Architect, there were no pictures of architects. So I envisioned myself.
Amen.
That's why it was never an issue. I realize today that when students and people look up architecture, they don't always see themselves. And so it becomes concern, become more cognizant of it. If you type in the word architect in Google, most of the time you'll see white males. You don't see a lot of diversity in women in it. So I can see that being a challenge, but it was not a challenge. It was not a concern of mine throughout my career.
All right, great. I would like you to comment on this statement I read when researching for this interview. So, quote, most architects don't really start to become good until later in life. I'm talking in their 50s. I imagine that you have to come to some sort of understanding as to who you are as an individual before you can start to be consistent with imparting your imprint onto a building, end quote.
I do not agree with that statement at all.
Okay, all right.
I believe that you don't have to wait until your 50s. I believe when the opportunity presents itself, you take it at whatever age you are.
Gotcha.
I had an opportunity at the age of 32 to have my own business.
Wow.
My own practice for about 4 or 5 years. I had my own architecture practice, and I did community things for about 5 years. And then I had opportunity to work on, which I consider one of my top projects of all my career. I was one of the architects for this Chase Field here in Arizona. And I had a lot of responsibility, and that was at 36 years old.
Wow.
And so I do not agree with that it happens in your 50s. I believe that there's no time it can happen as early as 30 when you come out of school, or it can happen later in 50s. But it also depends on the kind of goals you have. Yeah, if you have certain goals, it might take longer to happen than other goals. But I do not believe that it happens in the 50s.
Okay. Did you have goals when you came out of college, or you were just going with the flow? How was it for you?
I had goals. I had a number of goals. I had professional goals of eventually having my own firm. I had goals of making a difference in the community. I had financial goals of the kind of salary I was going to make. And those are the 3 goals I had.
Okay.
And I met all those goals.
Amen. Yeah, that's what's up. I read that all states require architects to be licensed. Licensing requires typically include completing a degree program in architecture, gaining relevant experience through a paid internship, and passing architect registration examination. And was that the educational journey to becoming an architect for you?
That was the journey I also took for me. That's correct. You go to school, I mentioned a couple of years, and then you take the exam. I am registered. I'm one of the few Black architects registered in 20 states.
Wow. Oh, so it's like having a law profession where you have to be registered in the state to be able to work on a project?
That's correct. To be the architect, every project has what they call an architect of record, and that is the person who signs the drawings of the architect. And so in order to be an architect of record, you have to be registered, licensed in that particular state. You take the exam one time, it's a 6-part exam, but once you pass the exam, you can be registered in almost every state. The only exceptional state is California because of earthquakes.
Oh, wow.
You have to take more exams for California. You have to take what they call not just the written exam, but you have to take an oral exam in California.
Wow. So do you have yours in California?
I do not have California. I have 20 states, not California. I have not had any projects in California, so it has not required me to do it.
Oh, okay. Do you think it's something you would pursue, or is you over it?
No, I wouldn't pursue now anymore. No,
Okay.
not my stage in my career, no.
Okay. What was your first big break, the project that got the attention of your colleagues?
The first project was a senior living facility when I was living in Washington, D.C. It was called the Montgomery, and I was given a lot of responsibility to create the drawings for it. I spent literally all night in the office sometimes to get the work done. And that was the first project that drew the attention of the principals in the office and other members, that knowing that even though I was still in the early stages of my career, they could trust me, they knew I could be held accountable, and I was willing to learn. And that was the first project that I really people started noticing my skill sets.
Oh, that's great. What has been the top 3 projects of your career thus far?
The 3 projects, it starts with a fence around a school. And with your expression is the expression I usually get when I tell them that. And I can tell you the story behind it.
Please.
It's an elementary school that my children were going to. And the school that they went to was on a corner of a very busy intersection. There was no fence there. And during recess, they would play out in the grass area. Here in Arizona, I live in Arizona. In Arizona, there's not a lot of grass everywhere. So at the school, though, they had a grass space near the corner of the site where they would play during lunchtime. The principal of the school approached me. She knew I was an architect and asked me would I design a fence around the perimeter of the entire school for safety and for safety of access and in and out. And so I designed this fence. And 2 weeks after the fence was built, I picked up my son and daughter from school, and they told me that there was a car accident during lunchtime. And cars spun out of control and they hit the fence.
Wow.
And that if it had not been for the fence, some of their friends or colleagues would have been hurt.
Yeah.
And when they told me that struck to me. That's the reason I became an architect, to make a difference in the community, to help the built environment. So that by far is my favorite, proudest project.
Yes.
My second is, I mentioned the Chase Field, which is with the Arizona Diamondbacks. I was the architect for if anybody looks it up and Googles it, they can see it. It was one of the first movable dome stadiums in the United States.
Wow.
Built in 1998. And I was responsible for helping make that roof open and close. I was responsible for on the exterior. I had a lot of responsibility on it. So I was I call it hands-on architect for that. And I was able to do that. And that's one of my top 3 projects. The third is a tie. And one is because I mentioned there's too many community projects that I wouldn't identify as my favorite, but I have a sports facility. I mentioned at the very beginning, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia has very special meaning to me. Not only was I the architect, was a project manager for that, I was able to make sure that a lot of minority and women-owned businesses in Atlanta had an opportunity to work on that project.
Yes.
So that is something that really happened. So I was able to do that and get a 25% participation, which is always a goal, and we were able to achieve that. And on a personal front, here in our household, we call it the house that Dad built. And the reason is that my son, I have a son and daughter. My daughter, ironically, is an education policy analyst. She's advocate. So I found interesting what you do as counselor. So she does that in DC. My son was at the time and still works for the Patriots.
Oh.
His role has changed now. He's now director of organizational development. However, back in 2018, 2019, he was the athletic trainer for the New England Patriots. And they played the Super Bowl against the Rams. And I was able to go and see my son win a Super Bowl trophy in a building that I built.
Wow. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's incredible. What a blessing. That's incredible. That's an awesome story.
Thank you. It is. It really is really awesome. So that's why I struggle with the third one, because it's too many.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. That's a game changer. What does continuing education look like in your profession?
It looks like, based on what you do, what you specialize in. Let's say I am an architect for the city of Phoenix. Oh. And I'm the first African-American architect ever hired by the city of Phoenix. Oh. And my role for continuing education, I want to learn more about municipal architecture and the trends in community centers. So my continuing education will be based on the things that will be related to doing municipal architecture. But continuing education is based on an architect, whatever they're doing. Let's say I have an architect, she's very responsible for hospitality and resorts. So she'll go to conferences about resort architecture and the trends there. Or somebody who does a lot of drawing with computers using Revit, they'll go to a conference or do continuing education how to better their skills in computer drawing. So it's based on whatever you're doing in your career. The continuing education is available either in person or electronic, but you always gear it towards whatever you're doing in your career.
Okay, that makes sense. Great. What are some of the struggles aspiring architects can expect to experience early on, and how should they overcome them?
One of the struggles is that architecture, unfortunately, does not really embrace mentoring like other professions. And so when you are out there in your profession, it's very hard to get a mentor sometimes to help guide you through it. As an African American, it's very tough to have mentors in offices because you're usually maybe the only person of color in the office. And so unfortunately, racism is part of that challenge. People do not see beyond the color of the skin, and do not give you a chance for the opportunities, and it's a reality. And so I had a mentor very early in my career from somebody who gave me my first job as an internship, an African-American who did not work at that firm, but he guided me through that. That's the challenge, one of the challenges. The other challenge is architecture is a very demanding profession. It takes a lot of commitment, it takes sacrifice. Yeah. Sacrifice means, I mentioned before, sometimes working all night. And it's not about dollar for dollar. You don't get paid for all those extra hours, you get a salary. So they expect you to do whatever needs to get done. So I gave up, some social life. I gave up some of those kind of things that a lot of people want to do. And that's a challenge to do. And the key to that is finding a way to balance that. They mentioned life-work balance. And with me, family is very important. So I made sure that I would figure out a way that I could be there for my family while pursuing this career. And like I said, architecture is a very tough profession. And the challenge is also when you want to go to the next level, to find the steps and maneuver the steps and figure out the steps to get to the next level can be a challenge without mentors or without organizations like NOMA, which I'm in, that provides that support. So I recognize that anybody who's interested, not just in architecture, but any profession, to get a mentor early on to help you with those challenges.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Yep. I read that one of the most thrilling feelings for an architect is seeing that project completed. Is that still the biggest rush and thrill for you after all these years?
I'm sorry, you broke up. I didn't hear what you said.
I said, I read that one of the most thrilling feelings for an architect is seeing that project completed. Is that still the biggest rush and thrill for you after all these years?
It is a rush, but the biggest rush is to seeing the looks of faces of people who will use the building. That's the big rush. The big rush is the kid going to a ballpark for the first time, or a kid going to get their library card, or a parent taking their family as a family outing that they do every year to a civic planet, and seeing that do that. Those, looking at the expressions of those who use it gives me the absolute biggest rush. 1A, 1B again. Seeing the building complete, but seeing the rush is seeing the people and the expression of people who really appreciate it and enjoy the building.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you think is the biggest misnomer about being an architect?
I think one of the biggest misnomers is that people will say architects don't make a lot of money. And that is absolutely not true. And I think sometimes people use that as a deterrent. Mostly other architects use it as a deterrent. I'm here to say that and I say this for any profession, but especially architecture, come up with economic goals for yourself, because no one wants to work for free. You shouldn't work for free. If you're good at what you do, you should be paid and compensated fairly. And there's nothing wrong with having dreams of $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever a year. I think that's a big misnomer of architects. I think the other misnomer is, and this is changing, is that architects they just care about themselves and not about people. Some architects do, but not all architects do. More architects are more cognizant and want to design for the people. So I think those are two big misnomers about architecture.
Thank you.
I will say that, but that's not a misnomer. It is a challenge, but it's not unattainable, but it is a challenge. But the misnomer, I would say, is the financial and just overcoming that obstacle of that.
What would you suggest high school students do if they are interested in becoming an architect? What should they be doing right now?
What they should be doing right now is first talk to their counselor to see if they are taking the courses necessary to get into an architecture school. So they might need to take more math or something like that. So that's one of the first things that high school students can do. Talk to their counselor as soon as they can. The second is most cities in this country have a NOMA chapter, a National Organization of Minority Architects. Find that chapter. And there's also the American Institute of Architects chapters also. Find those chapters. Let them know that you're interested in becoming an architect. A lot of these organizations, especially NOMA, will invite you to go to a meeting, or they might connect you with an architect, because I believe the earlier that you can meet architects, go visit an office, the better. There's organizations called ACE, which I believe is our mentorship program regarding architecture, construction, and engineering. Some cities have that. So find an organization that is geared towards mentoring youth interested in design or construction professions.
That's great advice. Yep. You are the president founder of the Arizona chapter of National Organization of Minority Architects. What is your role in that position?
My role is, I am now the past president of that.
Okay.
So, but I started in 2017. But my role when I was president, I started the chapter with 16 other people, was to organize the chapter, come up with a plan of how we were going to run the chapter, how we were going to recruit members, basically what our mission was. So I was responsible and led that effort to do that. And we came up with a mission of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. We came up with different programs. We wanted to be community-based. And so as president, you're basically responsible for everything. You have a that you delegate to, but you're responsible to keep the morale going, you're responsible to keep interest going, and you're responsible for action. So it's a little bit of everything that a president does. But I was responsible for trying to pull together and organize this chapter to anywhere from website design, to mentoring students, to developing a scholarship for students. And so all those things as president, you're a part of leading the organization and planning of a chapter. I'm now West Region Vice President. And
okay.
So now seven chapters in the West Region. I assist them with the growth of their chapters and help them out with anything that National NOMA can do.
Okay, and what do you guys do to increase awareness of the profession to people of color?
I'm sorry, you broke up.
Oh, I said, what have you guys done to increase awareness of the profession to people of color?
What we have done is we have a K through 12 outreach program.
Oh.
In the K through 12 outreach program, we approach it different ways. We let schools know that we're available for Career Day. We also have programs that schools will have us come to their school and teach kids for 1 or 2 days during the summer about maybe architecture and maybe design something or build a model. And then NOMA here and nationally has something called Project Pipeline. And that is to help students from grade school all the way up through college be there for them. So in grade school, I mentioned K-12 and outreach, and in Project Pipeline. In high school, it's career days and mentorship. In college, we mentioned a lot of students go to college, sometimes they're first generation, or they're away from home. And so what we do is we reach out to our local schools here, Arizona State University and University of Arizona, and we meet with students to let them know we've got their back. We're their mentors to them. And so they come to us with any issues they have. We organize a scholarship program for them. So they have a scholarship that they can earn. We also have, we just had this last week, we have a diversity career fair. So the students are getting a chance to meet firms for possible jobs in the future. And so that's from the very beginning, we wanted to get students, we want to be there for students of color who may not have seen, I didn't see my first architect of color until I was in college. And we want students to see the first architect of color when they're in 6th grade, when you're thinking about careers or earlier. So that is what we do.
Okay, do you have links to all of these scholarships, programs, things of that nature so I could put in the show notes?
Do I have, I'm sorry, one more time?
Do you have links to all of these opportunities so I could put them in the show notes?
You have a link to our website.
Okay, all right, I'll go on there and organize that.
And it has all of that, that's all that's in the website, all that information. I do have slides if you want me to give you a link to a PowerPoint slide.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We can do that to you. And I'll send you a little bit of what we do. And that gives you a summary of all the different programs and everything like that. So I'll email that to you as well.
All right, great. I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Okay, so we've covered a lot, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Before we get to the last question, would you like to share anything with our audience that I missed?
I want to share that anybody who has a goal and dream to really go for it. And because no goal is too high, no dream is too impossible to attain. And I really believe that. And so if you're prepared to commit yourself to whatever that is, go for it. But realize you're not alone. One of the challenges in architecture is that sometimes you feel like you're the only one, but you're not. Organizations like NOMA and other organizations want to help you and want to help you advance. So I would say to everybody here, you're not alone. Yes, it's a challenge, but at the end of the day, you will enjoy it. And so that is something that I have no regret. I've been in architecture for over 30 years now. And it's been an enjoyment to see the next generation come through. And I just tell everybody to enjoy the ride, because it's a journey, and to enjoy the ride.
That's great. Thank you. That's great. Our last question is this. If you could text your younger self, what age would you text and what would the message be?
I would text myself to when I was 18 and getting ready to go to college. And I would tell myself is that you're going to embark on something that's going to have challenges, but always find a way to enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
There was things that happened to me. I ran into some racism in the colleges. And so because of that, I did not enjoy the college life as many people have. Became so laser focused on becoming an architect and overcoming that. So I didn't get a chance to enjoy the other sides of life. When you start early in your career, I mentioned about, sacrifices of weekends and everything like that. That's true, but find the time to give to yourself. Don't be so hard on myself. I would tell myself, don't be so hard on yourself. You're going to realize a dream, but enjoy life at the same time.
That's great. That's great. That's great. So thank you, Mr. Nelson. We really appreciate it. We hope that our listeners are better for experiencing some of your journey, your tips, your insight in the business. And we're sure people are going to enjoy this podcast and get a lot from it. And we're so appreciative of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And please let me know when it's going to be broadcast. I'd like to share it with some of our students here.
I will. I'll send you the link. It's going to be available Tuesday. So I'll send you the link as soon as it's done. And I look forward to the slides. I'm going to put as much information as I can in the show notes so people can get the most out of it.
Okay, I'll send it to you in the next few minutes.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you again.
All right, blessings. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for spending time with us. Please share, review, and subscribe now. Follow us on social media, where we post new guest alerts and show recaps. All the information will be in the show notes. Thank you and be blessed.